Welcome to the Who Knows This podcast, where I track down in the trenches experts to answer questions that we all want the answers to. I'm Sam Visnic, and I'm a veteran in working with people with chronic aches and pains by way of massage therapy, exercise, pain education, hypnotherapy, and lifestyle education. Today we're going to talk about the foot and how it influences pretty much everything in the body. So let's get started. Hey there, Sam Visnic here. Welcome to another episode, and I want to read a quick bio here so you know who we're talking to. Next up here, I've got Dr. Emily Splichal. She's a functional podiatrist and a human movement specialist, is the founder of EBFA Global, creator of the Barefoot Training Specialist Certification, author of Barefoot Strong, and CEO founder of Naboso Technology. With over 20 years in the fitness industry, Dr. Splichal has dedicated her medical career towards studying postural alignment and human movement as it relates to barefoot science, foot-to-core integration, and sensory integration. So let's welcome her and get started. All right, Dr. Splichal, thank you so much for being on the podcast here and on this great topic here that I think that there's a lot of knowledge and a big gap here that I think you're going to fill for us. So we're going to be talking about the foot today. So thank you for being here, first of all.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
All right. So let's dive right into this. And I'd like to ask a big picture question here. What are your views on, if you can paint just a huge generalization, the foot? Why does it matter to the human physiology? Why do we care?
Yes. So the foot, I'm very passionate about the feet and how they influence movement. And your feet specifically, you could think of it as the foundation to your body, almost like the foundation of a building or a home. If it's not stable and sound, the rest of the infrastructure will start to kind of collapse inward. And then in addition to this mechanical support structure, I've actually dedicated my podiatry career to more the sensory side of the foot. So I'm fascinated on how the skin in the bottom of the foot and the nerves that weave around the muscles and the connective tissue actually influence our movement, our perception of our body, and activate the brain.
That's a whole lot of stuff. And we're definitely going to unpackage that as we go here. So in particular, let's back up 1 second. And you are a podiatrist, all right? So I think one of the things that always comes up, and I like to ask because there's so many disciplines that seem to kind of intermingle a little bit, but they're definitely different. What is the difference between a podiatrist and, for example, if somebody were to go to their orthopedic doctor who looks at the foot? What's the difference between these?
Yeah, so when you're thinking an orthopedist, so an orthopedist would be either a DO, which is a doctor of osteopathic medicine, or an MD, which is a medical doctor thinking traditional Western medicine education. A podiatrist is a DPM, so a doctor of podiatric medicine. We go through medical school in the same way that a medical doctor does, which means 4 years of medical school. Ours is called Podiatric Medical School. And then we do a residency that is now 3 to 4 years in length. And the purpose of that residency is to learn how to do surgery. So it's the medical management of a patient and then the surgical technique and the perfection of the surgical skills. Once that's completed, then you are licensed, similar to how an MD orthopedist would be licensed. Some of the training is slightly different. I will often tell people that if you have more of a forefoot, general foot question, podiatry. If you have major foot and ankle trauma or need reconstruction, that's where foot and ankle orthopedists are really good.
Gotcha. So we're more on the functional side of things here.
Yes.
And in particular, your experience is far more than just purely your podiatry training. And you've extended quite a bit into more functional health in terms of fitness and movement and so forth. So what led you kind of in that direction? Did that precipitate your podiatry training or did it come after the fact? Where did it come in line there?
So before I even went to podiatry school, I was in fitness. And before I was in fitness, I was a competitive gymnast. So movement and barefoot movement was always part of my life since I was age 6. I just didn't appreciate it at that time that it was barefoot movement. And then when I started going through fitness, that's what really laid the foundation to my passion for movement. go to podiatry school, went through all of the traditional training, had to go to residency to learn to be a surgeon. So very Western medicine, must cut technique. It's that philosophy. In the middle of residency, because of my appreciation for movement, I had this internal conflict of how my passion was fitting into this career. So I actually took a break. I left residency, which is, I don't recommend that for anyone to try to do that. But I left residency and then went back to graduate school where I got my master's in human movement. And then that is really what connected my fitness appreciation for movement with my podiatric medical understanding of the foot. And then the glue in the middle is the master's in human movement, which helped me to expand beyond just the foot and how breath and pelvic floor is important to movement. Long story short, got licensed, finished, was trained as a surgeon. I did surgery for 5 years, absolutely enjoyed it, but then started to see that you can really be good at one thing or excellent at one thing. You can be good at a lot of things, but like excellent and a leader in a subsector of a specialty. And my passion going back to movement really connected to this exploration of the brain, fascia, breath, pelvic floor. So I started taking advanced trainings. I actually am a fellow of the American Anti-Aging Academy, where I was studying anti-aging medicine / functional medicine. And that's where that evolved into functional podiatry. So I have a very niche practice that is chronic pain, chronic movement dysfunction, and chronic movement disorders. And then I incorporate functional medicine, functional movement, and regenerative medicine. So I do not do surgery anymore.
Gotcha. Yeah. And, in the field, those of us who've been people or listeners who have been listening to our podcast talking about chronic pain is a big thing, right? We've got a lot of different components that can influence pain. And we're all obviously approaching it from a lot of different angles. But for the most part, just to try to remove lots of different types of stressors from the body. And the foot is a big one. And I think that in particular, there's a lot that goes into this, which is the stuff that in particular in the health and the fitness field is a lot of standard recommendations, and almost everybody associates going to the doctor or podiatrist with just getting orthotics. And, just kind of it. And there's so much more to it, as we're going to talk about. And in particular, I kind of think that the best way to dive into this is to talk about the kind of nature of the foot that influences a lot of your approach. And this concept that you brought up previously, I heard you talk about surface science and the idea of essentially, if I'm getting the gist of it, is just how that foot interacts with the thing that's going on below it. So can you introduce us into this concept and how that influences kind of how things move from your thinking after that?
Yeah, so I look at the foot as the sensory gateway into the brain. And to control movement, you have to have, let me take a step back. Sensory information in is what controls movement out. Sensory has to precede motor. It is what it is. It's how the nervous system works, how the brain works, is it has to understand how to navigate our environment. So looking at the foot as the only contact point between the body and the ground, being the foot, or more specifically, the skin in the bottom of the foot, is really opening this opportunity to influence the coordination, the processing, the perception, the optimization of all of that information. So that means that you want to think about what is everything that could possibly go between the skin and the ground, right? You have shoes, you have socks, insoles, orthotics, and then you have the surface itself. Is the surface hard, soft, irregular? Does it vibrate? Does it not? All of those interfaces or features is really what I then study and has led to the development of Naboso, which is our textured product line to activate the foot in this interface. One thing that I think people don't realize is that movement is based off of our perception of self. So you need to know where your physical body is in space. And we lose that with certain injuries. You can actually lose that with certain mental health conditions. So depression is a big one, that people disassociate or disconnect from their physical body. So if you're talking about chronic pain, obviously chronic pain and depression, there's correlations with this. Certain diseases, if they have neuropathy, well, you can't feel your feet, right? Because of that disconnection. So I try to find ways for my patients to then connect to their physical body, meaning their entire physical body, and then also their feet, and then bring that into their consciousness, and then optimization of movement.
So it seems such in some regard, a simple topic, but people really take that for granted, is that concept of, as a human being, it's a miracle that we can operate in three-dimensional space. And the only way we can stay upright and respond is by using our senses. And something as simple as, just kind of in the way that I think about it, is that I tell my clients, if you can't feel the floor, your nervous system doesn't know how to respond or how to proceed forward. And sometimes it's not really hard. I think they don't get it. And I'll use two things. I say, number one, have you ever walked down the stairs? And they say, well, of course. Have you ever tried to walk down the stairs in the dark? And we are far more apprehensive, and it's like it changes behavior. And just because of your senses are now a bit disrupted, you might be using a little bit more of your visual system or whatever. And the second thing is that sensory input, how profound this can be. Everybody's had the experience of going to the dentist and having Novocaine in your mouth. You don't know where your tongue is, where your mouth is. Everything is screwed up. So I really want to beat that point home that you just said about, if you can't sense and feel the floor, everything changes, tons of behaviors. And that is so critical that I just wanted to hammer that point home in talking about that. So let's dive in a little bit more about this relationship of what happens when your foot is touching the floor. Now, obviously, that goes into the easiest one, is when your foot is barefoot. So when your foot is on the ground, you're sensing it, right? And it seems like we live in a far different environment than we used to. We probably used to walk around barefoot. I always find it bizarre, though, that I think that as human beings, we must have had some pretty tough feet, because we were walking around for a long time without something that we had to make, which was sandals. So somebody figured out that this was a good idea. But the barefoot training, and this has kind of become a revolution. And the first question I have, are you happy to see that people are pushing a lot more, talking about barefoot science, and barefoot shoes?
100%. So the way that you can look at footwear, shoes, a traditional shoe, is that I'm sure everyone has in their mind maybe a thicker, cushioned, supportive, structured shoe. We can talk about the structure and the stiffness, but I primarily like to focus on that cushion and that interface and the hardness of that interface, or the softness. And the softer that interface is, consumers will think that it's perceived as comfortable. Actually, footwear industries want you to feel that way. Be like, oh, this memory foam and this soft cushion is just going to be so comfortable to you. So there's this paralleled perception that soft equals comfort equals positive, good, right? But that's actually not the case. That cushion creates a sensory disconnect. It's called damping. Damping is blocking or skewing. It's almost like mufflers on your ears, right? So if I put my hands over my ears and I don't hear as well, it's because my hands are damping the sound waves to get into my ear so that I can hear. Same thing on the foot, that if you have a soft cushioned shoe, it's damping, skewing, taking away the accuracy of the perception of information coming from the ground. And we need that information to know how hard we're striking the ground, the amount of impact forces coming in, maintaining balance, navigating irregular surfaces. So it's very, very impactful in many different ways of movement, right? So it could be balance and posture, or it could be athletic performance and injury prevention, right? Or it could just be efficiency. We are designed to be efficient beings, which means we want to walk efficiently. We want to go further, longer on less calories. It's the basis of evolution and functional movement is efficiency. if you can't feel the ground and you don't have that accurate perception, you're going to work harder than you need to, which is less efficient.
So as we start to not sense the floor, and then we're working harder, I would imagine that that's going to manifest as increased activity elsewhere. And this is where I want to, because this is probably jumping in a little too soon, but talking about some of those deeper stabilizers of the body, if you can't feel the floor, and most people think that the core muscles are, abs, obliques, but we got to look deeper than that. And that's where we start to get into those diaphragms of the body. And you talked about this, but I think it might be a good piece to jump in here. When you can't feel the floor, and that way probably you have to make up for the tension somewhere else, do you start to see negative effects upward up the chain into some of these deeper stabilizer muscles inside the body?
Absolutely. And to answer that, I'm going to take a step back for a second and talk about gravity and how important gravity is to literally everything we do. Our posture, our movement, our ability to balance is we have to have this force coming down. I mean, look at an astronaut. That's the best analogy of no gravity and anti-gravity, is that it throws off and it's not giving the sensory input to the nervous system to know what is up and what's down, right? Where's your body? So gravity is this constant pressure down and we push up into it, and that's how we stand, right? And then your feet are pushing down into the ground. So that relationship to gravity. Our core, abs, is our center of gravity, which I'm sure the listeners have heard of, right? Where's your body's center? Your center of mass or center of gravity is actually lower than your belly button. So it's not your belly button. It is lower and it sits in between your pelvis. So your hips is where your center of mass sits. That center is actually deeply connected to your foot, or the only contact point between the body and the ground. So I will say that your foundation and your foot ground relationship is deeply connected to your center of mass or your center of gravity. And yes, those muscles are your pelvic floor, your transverse abdominals. It's not your six pack. That's a different type of muscle. It's deeper. And then the pelvic floor is actually connected to the diaphragm that we breathe with. And then that's connected to the intrinsic muscles of your feet. So your foot's core is connected to your body's core or pelvic floor. And then that continues all the way up. It actually goes to your tongue and to your palate. So you can kind of sequence or integrate all of those.
So when we see changes to the foot, we're going to see changes in how your body is moving that center, right? Back and forth. And in particular, if you're standing for a long period of time, that's probably going to be more fatiguing if the center is moving forward or backward and you're having to respond to that, right? So it's one system that's just kind of swaying, trying to find the position where you're using the least amount of energy, it sounds like. Right?
Correct. And what I would also say is that someone that has an unstable, disconnected foot, hands down, they're disconnected in their core. You cannot be optimally stable in your core or your lumbopelvic hip complex, your pelvis, if your foot is offline. It's just neurologically impossible. So if I'm working with someone, I'll use an athlete as an example, because when you get to like really high level of athletic performance, it's very subtle modifications of the nervous system that will make an impact on the athlete because they're just at their peak, right? Lots of natural talent there. So trying to optimize and get those online can seem like a small change, but it's a powerful impact in the timing and coordination of stability and power. Similarly, if I have a patient who has chronic low back pain or chronic SI joint pain or chronic groin pain, I know that the timing and the coordination of the stabilization of their center is slower. If I look at their feet and they're overpronated and they have a midfoot collapse, I know that they're connected. One, I can't fix the core without fixing the feet or vice versa. I would never leave a patient and just give them orthotics and then say, okay, everything in your core is just going to come online. I teach them how to get them online in sequence. So you could definitely have a top down, bottom up connection there.
That's an important piece. And I talked about this previously with a physical therapist who was talking about occlusional devices in particular. And we got into the interesting discussion of that an appliance or an orthotic is a tool. And if you just stick the thing in there, the nervous system's probably going to react to it, but only to a degree, like propping up someone's feet in order to get their pelvis level. Well, that's great. But if the nervous system doesn't learn how to interact with the tool, then the behavioral change doesn't seem to happen, right? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, that's actually a great way to explain it. And that's where, unfortunately, a lot of podiatrists don't understand that because that's not taught in podiatry school. It is the human body and the foot is looked at very mechanical, like we are a bag of bones and you just move the arch to then externally rotate the leg or the tibia, and then therefore your Jenga puzzle pieces will stack. But we're not just these Jenga puzzle pieces. You have fascia and muscles in the nervous system influencing that. So yes, you do have to sequence it. And I think that's where a lot of people will say, oh, orthotics worked for me. Same foot, same everything. Orthotics don't work for him. Why him, but not him, right? It's because it's much more complex than that. And the complexity I find is the nervous system.
Yeah, and it's a learning machine, right? So it's got to actually learn how to cope with the environment. And I think that this is a key piece too with things. We could take that sample and go all across the fitness industry or whatever, find lots of examples of that. Whereas people can only deadlift, they have back pain and they put a weight belt on. It's the only time they don't have back pain when they lift weights without realizing that the body has its own weight belt. And whereas, yes, it's a temporary fix to put the belt on because it provides that sensory input or that crutch, the nervous system doesn't, and actually somehow can become weaker and more dysfunctional by always training with the belt. And then when you take it off, your nervous system doesn't know where it is in space. It doesn't have that feedback loop. And so I would imagine is that, these tools as they're used in the short run, and everybody has different opinions on this, I'm sure, because of different types of conditions. With orthotics, I think people tend to think about orthotics as something that once they have them, they never stop using them. Or are we able to use orthotics as a tool and then take them out? I mean, is this what we're looking to do, is to train the nervous system with these types of tools?
Yeah, so I never give orthotics to a patient without also giving them the integration exercises. So it's not a magical device that you slide it in your shoes and all your problems go away. I practiced in New York City for 10 years, downtown Wall Street, and everyone super busy just wanted that magic fix. And then, right, that's it, because they got their busy career to deal with. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And it's my job to make sure that the patient or mass population understands that, because it is very misleading if they do hear that from someone that doesn't understand the other piece to it. This is also why understanding it, there are, I call them nervous system hacks. Naboso, that we'll talk about in a little bit, is a hack to the nervous system. You're kind of tricking the system, understanding how it can learn or work through subconscious stimulation. Kinesiology tape is another one. Compression apparel is another technique. And they're just things that talk to the nervous system subconsciously while you're doing something else. And it's a reminder, stabilize, activate, coordinate, right? So that you don't stay passively engaged with, say, an orthotic.
Yeah, because it's hard to pay attention all day long, right? It's nice to have some stuff that's kind of operating in the background to facilitate the changes that we want. And that makes perfect sense. So let's move on to the topic here where we've talked about this idea of the connection of all of these things. How do feet become dysfunctional? How do we start to lose the sense? So we talked about the footwear, and obviously having shoes that have 3 inches of foam in them start to disconnect us. But we have a lot of other dysfunctional footwear as well. Stiff work boots, we have high heels, we have these sorts of things. And are all of these things kind of contributing to causing a loss of function in our feet that's triggering a lot of these issues?
Yeah, any type of footwear that's restricting natural foot movement. which could be splay in the forefoot. So a narrow shoe, a high heel, a men's dress shoe that's narrow. Women's ballet flats are very narrow. So anything that is restrictive to splay. Splay is the spreading of the digits and actually the spreading of the metatarsal heads. So you want the ball of your foot to open up. Shoes will restrict that. Obviously feeling the ground, so the cushion. And then a common one that you'll see in footwear is the heel toe drop. So that declination in it where the heel is sitting higher, not all the way exaggerated like a high heel that a woman would wear, but a little bit of a lift, even half of an inch, can then start to take away the natural range of motion of the soft tissue and the joints.
That's an interesting one too, because we're seeing a lot of times in the weight room as athletes that don't have good ankle flexibility starting to constantly do squats and exercises with their heels lifted. Mm-hmm. And I've always looked at that and say, that's a good quick fix for, range of motion issues, but there's got to be some effects on that if we really look at the foot, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, any trick like that, you could say. I always ask the trainer, the coach, the therapist, as long as you understand why, and you can defend why you did that, and you're still introducing them to other stimuli, right? Then, so be it. Olympic lifting shoes, for like an actual Olympic lifting shoe where it's built in with a heel lift, there's a functional purpose for that, is that you have to cheat the ankle a little bit to go to the depths of a squat that an Olympic lifter needs to generate sufficient power in the glutes and in the hips. So there's a functional purpose for it, right? But that's a defendable purpose. And then I would still have that athlete or that individual releasing their feet, doing myofascial work, doing their first repetitions barefoot with lighter weights before they're doing the snatches and the jerks and things like that. And then as they push the weight, put on your Olympic lifting shoes. I've actually made custom orthotics that are really rigid for Olympic lifting athletes to prevent the foot from collapsing too much under all that weight. But there's a functional purpose to that, right? It's not functional movement, meaning walking. It's the functional movement for that athlete in that moment in time.
There you go. I like that idea. And it's just adapting it to the exact situation that you need, right? Human bodies can do a lot of things. And if we're smart, we can get them to do those things, but also make sure that we're covering all of our bases to maintain the health, right?
Yeah. And if I could just add real quick on that, is that a lot of sports and arts like dance are intentionally not functional. So we have to understand that.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where whatever we do when we're not training for that art or that sport is where we get all this opportunity to do what we're talking about. Right. I have a hard time with people that try to think they're going to change the soccer cleats or the football cleats or an ice skate or a hockey skate to be this wider, more natural. It doesn't feed the function of the sport, but that's okay, because that's that time and period and that moment of stress when you're not on the field or the ice or in the skates. What are you doing outside of that to then go back to natural, optimized, sensory stimulating freedom of movement? So I just wanted to kind of add that a little bit, that we do things intentionally that are not functional for the purpose of the sport or the art. And that's what makes it an art.
Absolutely. And I've said this thing for a number of years now, is that the new performance, pro performance, is recovery.
Yeah.
And, it's like there's only so far you're going to do. Everybody does the things that are pro performance, but what has been missing is the recovery, and the recovery from those extremes is the thing that recovers the body and actually makes the performance better. Mm-hmm. So maybe not making the cleat better, but doing all that stuff that you just talked about when your foot is not in the cleat will actually make the performance better without changing anything there, right?
Yeah.
So in leading into this, we talk about the next concept is, so when we're seeing all those footwear issues and so forth, now we move into the dysfunctions that we see in the feet, right? And the one that I think is surprising, I'm not a specialist by any means in focusing on foot issues and whatever, But wow, after COVID, how many cases, all of a sudden everybody had plantar fasciitis. I don't know why that is, because people are actually seem to be doing less. Maybe some were doing more, but we're seeing these foot issues, the common foot issues that people are constantly trying to resolve. I think, and again, I would love to hear your opinion on this. Plantar fasciitis seems to be the most common thing. And I've seen so many people with this. But then lots of other different issues and dealing with spurs, dealing with sesamoid issues, neuromas and so forth. And I'm sure that these are all coming with different types of causes, but is there a classification of the most common types of foot issues that you see are just purely related to poor footwear, just repetitive daily activities that you see that in your opinion are just avoidable with using the approaches that you're talking about?
Yeah. Plantar fasciitis would be the top one.
Yes.
And what's interesting about plantar fasciitis, this goes back to understanding and appreciation, the integration of the body, the fascia, the muscles. Okay. So if we are in this 2-year COVID period, which unfortunately is going to be continuing. So we have this modification on our level of activity, right? You're at home, maybe for a lot of people, you're sitting a lot more. You're not, running around. A lot of the trainers are training via Zoom, so they can kind of sit and do it. They don't have to be standing and involved in the same way. So we have that. What happens when you're in this persistent sedentary type position is that your pelvis, your hips, your glutes, your hip flexors, all of these muscles higher up become tighter and more restricted, which will influence the range of motion at the foot and the ankle. It will also disconnect the stability of the deep core muscles that we spoke about. So if I'm sitting in a chair and I have this nice lumbar support, like my core doesn't need to engage. It just went on holiday, right? So now you stand up and you start to put gravitational stress onto the foot and it's disconnected from its center of mass. So I see that a lot. Another injury that I see that we'll go back to plantar fasciitis is that people now have control over their work environment and maybe they're standing more. So a standing desk and they think, I'm doing the right thing, right? I'm not sitting all the time. I'm standing all the time. Standing is very hard on our connective tissue, on our posture, and on our system, because we were designed to move. We were not designed to sit all day. We were not designed to stand all day. We were designed to move. So I've actually seen a large increase in plantar fasciitis and Achilles tendinitis because of persistent standing. So same injury, slightly different cause, but then the ultimate cause was this repetitive postural stress. One is sitting, one is standing. Outside of plantar fasciitis, some of the other things that I will see is, persistent weakness of the foot can lead to hammer toes, metatarsalgia, which is often associated with limited ankle mobility, of course, bunions, post-tib tendinitis, things like that I can see. And then if you want to go directly related to COVID, I've seen some foot pathology related to that as well, because COVID can affect the nervous system. Of course, you have your peripheral nervous system all the way down to your feet. So yes, you can have these big injuries with repetitive stress. Maybe that repetitive stress is sitting too much, right?
It's interesting that you mentioned that too, because I had just said that and it just light bulb went off in my head. I was like, well, people during COVID are moving less, but that makes sense. And I've certainly had lots of cases of people that tell me, well, my back hurts when I sit. I went to a standing desk. Now they've got plantar fasciitis. So at least their back doesn't hurt, but now they have another problem as well. So in the midst of juggling all of these things, we have to move into, of course, talking about how you deal with these things. And that was the purpose of you starting your company in Naboso. And I have a nice success case already, having talked about this, is that one of my older clients had talked about her sister having difficulty with, after some procedures, feeling her feet. And now whenever I hear that, and I say, I can't feel my feet, and she was having significant balance problems. And of course, that's going to significantly change the quality of her life. I say, you might want to give these inserts, which you're going to talk about here in a second, a chance so she could start to get some novel stimuli into her feet. And guess what? It changed her life. She put them in there and all of a sudden she could feel the floor. She didn't constantly need to have somebody to hold on to. And again, this to me is so simple, immensely profound. And I think to her, it was just mind-boggling how much of a difference this makes. And nobody had said this to her before, who had suggested this before. So that's a testimonial before we even get into this, is to talking about the concept of Naboso and what we're looking to do when adding these tools in. So we're going to let's talk about how we use these things to help some of the issues that we just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. So everything that I speak about, that we've been speaking about, is really sensory based, connecting, tuning into our feet, recovering the feet. A lot of that I find from a success perspective is based off of compliancy. So maybe that's just being in medicine sufficient years and working with patients, that my goal is what is actually achievable for someone to do consistently on a daily basis so that this can be successful and I can help them move well for a long period, which I call movement longevity. So everything through Naboso is designed to be helping people connect to their feet passively so that they can do it consistently. Now, I'll show you one of our insoles. Now, all of the products at Naboso are based off of texture or 2-point discrimination. So you can see the little pyramids across the surface, right? Those pyramids are stimulating a very specific nerve in the bottom of the feet that is the same nerve that reads Braille. So when you read a Braille dots, the spacing between them is called 2-point discrimination. Okay, this differentiation of 2 points, which is what we're creating. The layman's term would be texture. Okay, so through texture, if you use our insoles in your shoes, in your slippers, you are bringing a very specific stimuli to the skin in the bottom of the foot to then wake up the nerves, wake up the muscles, bring circulation, blood flow to the skin, the nerves, the fascia, and the muscles. All of that is what's going to be consistent with recovery. Outside of our insoles, we have release tools. This is a NeuroBall that is a 3-in-1 tool. It splits into 2 domes. You can see where it's going to split into 2 pieces. So you can stand on this. If you have a standing desk, I would actually say stand on this to stimulate the feet. We have a sensory stick. So this is a stick. It's a 2-pound weighted stick that can activate the hand or the feet. We just launched socks, and our socks have the texture inside them. So we are trying to help people bring in stimulation to reset and recover the feet in a very passive way, an achievable way. You think of when you wake up and you brush your teeth in the morning, have your NeuroBall on the floor, and you're standing and releasing on the domes. You go into your shoes to go to work or run errands, or maybe some people wear house shoes, have the insole so that you are bringing that stimulation to the foot. Or at the end of the day, slide on the socks and walk around your home when you're cooking dinner with the socks on, and you're bringing that textured stimulation to the foot. So all very easy, achievable products to integrate, because my goal, again, is to create a lifestyle or rituals or habits that are done every single day, every day, to help then achieve, this connection to our body's foundation.
And so I think a cool part about that too is also noting, as you talked about with reading Braille, how fine the distinction is between small little points. I think that obviously highlights how many sensitive nerve receptors we have in the foot. So having those different sources of stimulation in there constantly. Now, do you find that, and I'm sure that, every time you put your foot on there, there's lots of different patterns and so forth in the way that you can move yourself, is outside of getting the sensory stimulation from there. But we're also talking about soft tissue. And of course, that's the kind of work that I do is soft tissue therapy, is working on the feet. And you also talk about foot releases as well, correct? So you're an advocate of doing massage therapy work for the bottom of the foot as being helpful. What is your input on how you generally instruct or teach patients on how to do that?
Yeah, so I call it a 5-minute, 5-point release. I use the NeuroBall, of course. I want to integrate a product that can combine the myofascial work with the neurostimulation, the sensory stimulation. Again, going to compliancy, if I can check more things off the list with one technique, increased compliancy, right? Increased success or efficacy. So I would use the NeuroBall, split it into the two domes. You just stand on it and it'll crack like an egg into two pieces. And then there's 5 points, and I have a video on my YouTube channel, but you would release the back of the heel by the arch, center of arch, ball of foot, side of foot, and then the inside, the medial side of the foot. You stand for 30 seconds on each of those points. And then inside, there's a little black ball inside this. And then you repeat each of those, and you do obviously both feet. So I call it a 5-minute, 5-point release. That's pinpoint pressure based versus rolling the foot. I find that the pinpoint pressure gives a better release to the foot than rolling. A lot of people will roll on, say, a tennis ball seated, and it's just not enough pressure to actually create a change in the muscle.
Let me ask you a question, because this is always something that people need to know, but are not often taught about, is how much intensity. And therapists range a good amount. Like, I understand and agree with a lot of different forms. I'm always like, make sure the nervous system doesn't feel too threatened, but you got to wake it up too. And I give people a scale. And I said a 10 is like so much pressure, you could barely even tolerate it. A 1 is like, are you touching me? Where is the range of intensity? And of course, it's a subjective scale that you think that most people should be performing their releases on in terms of intensity.
Yeah, I would agree with you that it needs to be enough to create a stimulation to the nervous system. With a lot of the pinpoint releases, you're actually inhibiting one of the nerve receptors. So like the muscle spindle, you're causing it to kind of calm down and relax, put it to sleep in a sense. And that requires enough pressure and consistent pressure. So I would say, if I had to give it a number, closer to like an 8, okay. if you had to give it a number. Big thing to remember is that if you do have anything that's pushing an 8 and you're like, oh my gosh, right, is to just keep breathing through it. The breath work is really important to the successful release. And you probably find this with your clients as well, that when
Absolutely.
people don't breathe, energy stops flowing. So to make it a little bit Eastern, is the energy has to kind of keep moving through the breath, and the breath calms things. And that's why you never want to kind of like that, because it's actually it's called allodynia. And allodynia is when a trigger to the body is perceived as more painful than it should be. That's an allodynia response. A lot of people with chronic pain actually have allodynia. And things that should not be painful are painful. Fibromyalgia is a good example of one, that things are just really, really painful. A lot of that can actually be linked to how they're breathing, because the breath influences the autonomic nervous system. And if it's putting you in like fight or flight is associated with this allodynia type response, where we actually want to be more analgesic or pain reducing, and slower, deeper breaths are analgesic as well.
There you go. So everybody listening, it's the Goldilocks phenomenon. It's just right, enough to be able to breathe and relax into it. And again, because that's such a common question, how hard do I push? And try to explain that to people. It's really subjective, and some people can take a lot of pressure. They love it and they can breathe through it. Some people not as much, depending upon their condition. So super helpful. And so, as we kind of wrap up here and we start to talk about, finding and utilizing these tools. So you have program obviously on YouTube, which I'll absolutely include in the show notes. Is there anything else that you offer to help people in terms of because of course, I'm sure there's lots of clinicians who might be listening to this, or individuals with complex foot conditions. Do you offer services? Do you have a way to online access your information? What do you got?
Yeah, so I have a book that's called Barefoot Strong, and you can get it on Amazon, or you can go to barefootstrong.com. And on there, we have some resources. It'll link out to where you can buy the book. And then there's foot type quiz. So if you want to actually determine your foot type, there's a way to do that on that website. And then my medical practice is my name. So dremilysplichal.com. Last name's a little hard, so I'm sorry. But if you Google Dr. Emily Podiatry, it'll come up. And I actually see patients virtually. A majority of my patients are virtual. And the success of a virtual consultation, or telemedicine, as people kind of have come to know it, is actually, it works extremely well. So if people are a little bit hesitant from a podiatry perspective of, will they get a sufficient evaluation? I, again, can treat a majority of things via virtual, and it's because I've been doing it for so long. I mean, I actually been doing telemedicine way before COVID, and it was trendy to do it. So just it's something that I offer through my website. And then Naboso is naboso.com, naboso.com. And the last one, if people are interested, is I actually train or teach other professionals how to look at movement the way that I do. And that's my education company, which is EBFA Global.
Awesome. And all of those, again, will be in the show notes. And I can tell all of you out there also is that, especially if you're working with a practitioner who is already kind of doing a lot of movement work and then seeking out an additional counsel, this is even way easier because, you're doing the work on looking at the foot and then, helping guiding the therapy or the treatment on that, and then handing off the instructions to the therapist that can manually carry them out. And this is the kind of teamwork that I always encourage people to have is, if you're doing virtual consults, you do as much as you can, but you could always outsource local, if you need soft tissue therapy, to a local soft tissue therapist. The real magic is the assessment or the evaluation of what's going on and having the proper sequence of things to do. So that could be extraordinarily magical, and absolutely easily doable with a consultation with you as well.
Yeah, I'm typically a second opinion or third, fourth.
I don't know anything about that. Yeah,
right.
I'm not usually the first person that people see, but I'm happy for that.
Yeah.
All right. So fantastic. I'll wrap us up here so that way it'll keep us under the hour. But thank you so much, Doc, for coming on. I'm sure, I'll have you back at a future point because I've got a lot of parking lot questions that I call them here that are just like, I'd love to have your feedback and opinion on, and see if we can get people to have much more functional and sensory input going into their nervous systems to keep them healthy and working properly. So thank you again so much for being here. Those of you out there, I'll see you next time.